So with the launch of Mortal Empires just around the corner, we started to really get a sense for what that combined map is going to look like. We've seen from a lot of the other YouTubers what we're going to be including in the Southlands. And with that, we can really see that Tomb Kings are even more so just around the corner. I don't think it's going to be very long until we at least get an announcement before Tomb Kings, and thus an actual launch of them, probably in the November or December timeline. I'm not 100% sure on that, of course, but it definitely kind of leads to that. So today, rather than going through just one lord, I'd like to go through both Arkhan and Settra and kind of go into what their relationship is, because we're going to get a little bit from the lore blurbs anyway, and how I think they're going to be definitely two of the starting legendary lords of the total 4 that we will be getting for the Tomb Kings. So let's start in here with Arkhan the Black, the Lich King. Arkhan the Black was the first and most loyal of the evil Nagash's followers. Arkhan helped lead the coup which brought the Arch-Necromancer to power, and he was the first, after his lord, to imbibe the elixir of life. Arkhan was the most adept of Nagash's pupils in the study of dark sorcery, and he quickly rose to become the Necromancer's trusted vizier and principal lieutenant. Arkhan led many armies against Nagash's enemies, and was never defeated in open combat. In the end, however, the sheer numbers of the Priest King's soldiers forced Nagash to retreat. It was Arkhan who led the suicidal counterattack that gave Nagash the opportunity to escape. For over an hour, Arkhan held back the army of the Seven Kings through feats of martial prowess and powerful sorcery. Arkhan finally fell, not to a hero's sword, but to a single spear hurled by an unknown soldier. Arkhan stared in horror at the shaft protruding from his chest, knowing that it had pierced his heart. With his dying breath, he threatened that a terrible curse would befall any who touched his corpse, and with that he slumped to the ground. Within seconds, dark flames had consumed Arkhan's flesh, leaving behind only a blackened skeleton. Whilst the rest of Nagash's followers were beheaded and burnt, none dared risk desecrating Arkhan's remains, and so they covered them under a cairn of stones instead. Nagash did not forget his most able lieutenant, and when he returned to wreak vengeance on Hekara, Arkhan was reborn as the Lich King, the first of Nagash's 9 Dark Lords. These fell beings were the foremost of Nagash's captains, and they brought despair and destruction to his foes. Though Nagash was eventually slain, his loyal servant Arkhan remained. For countless generations, Arkhan the Black vented his anger on the lands of the living, butchering the inhabitants of the world from the kingdoms of Araby in the west to the fledgling empire in the north. However, Arkhan the Black retained his master's unquenchable thirst for dominion over the realms of Hekara above all else, and he finally returned to the land of the dead. From his cursed black tower, Arkhan has carved out a powerful realm. The other Tomb Kings tolerate Arkhan, for he is a powerful ally to those who can afford his price. Of all the rulers in the land of the dead, Arkhan's greatest rival remains Settra the Imperishable. The two have fought against each other a dozen times, and though Arkhan's armies cannot rival the might of Settra's, neither can the King of Hekara overcome the Lich King's dark sorcery. Their battles thus end in stalemate, and only when Arkhan bows his head and utters false promises of fealty does Settra return satisfied to Khemri. Whilst Arkhan feigns servitude, he is secretly plotting for a way to hasten the inevitable return of Nagash. To this end, he has scoured the globe in search of the great Necromancer's enchanted items, for a fraction of his evil will still reside within each. Arkhan the Black wields his master's own magical staff, plucked from the clutches of the vampire Mandragon, and with it he channels the winds of magic to his whim. However, Arkhan's most prized possession is Liber Mortis, one of the 9 books of Nagash that hold the secrets to necromantic magic. One day, Arkhan the Black will succeed in resurrecting his Dark Master, and on that day the Tomb King shall be destroyed, and the world shall drown in death. So, we kind of see Arkhan the Black here, and if you know anything about the end times, you know how Arkhan the Black really kind of spirals out of control following this whole, I guess you could say, mandate that he has for bringing Nagash back to life, and eventually he does succeed in that with the help of many other agents, Krell being one of them, and some of the other people who eventually become the basically the super lords, the Mortarks, that's the name of them, Mortarks for Nagash. But Arkhan the Black is pretty interesting here because he is a full-on caster lord, obviously. And he's pretty integral to the lore of both the Tomb Kings, to the greater Warhammer world, and to the eventual end time. So he's a pretty huge pivotal lord, just in the same way that, you know, Manfred plays a hand in almost damn near everything in the Warhammer timeline. But Arkhan is a level 4 wizard in the tabletop, and what that really translates to into Total War Warhammer is absolutely nothing. It just means he's a wizard. But he only uses spells from the lore of death. So he's going to be exclusively a lore of death wizard. He's not going to have a custom-built kit like a Mazda Mundi or a Teclis. I could just picture him being a very good lore of death caster. And he has got some magic items here. He's got 3 to be exact, so that should be a pretty nice little set of quests for him and the such. But the Tomb Blade of Arkhan, the flesh of those slain by this dread blade burns away, leaving behind only a charred skeleton, enslaved for all eternity to Arkhan's dark will. And the way that this works, actually, it's pretty cool. So anytime that the weapon in tabletop scores a hit, an unsaved wound as it's called, there actually replenishes a wound to the unit that he's in. So it'd be interesting if something was used where okay, in a radius around Arkhan, it would do a resurrection or something like that. Or maybe using it empowers it, and you can use basically like a lifeblood, Earthblood or whatever, on a unit. You can basically get a one-time heal as you charge it in combat. So it'd be cool if it was kind of something like that, where maybe it wasn't so much that it automatically heals you, or heals around you, but after a certain amount of charges, or it helps hasten the recycle time by staying in combat, just like we see with Morgur, something where he has to stay in combat to get the charges for this, and then it's just a one-time supercharge, maybe a heal or something of the sort, or almost like a revivification crystal ability, where it actually will resurrect portions, or maybe something almost like a Invocation and a Heck. So that would be really interesting, where if it did give something of that sort. I would be very jazzed just to see that. But then we've got the Staff of Nagash. This staff was created by the Arch Necromancer Nagash to harness the reservoirs of dark magic stored within the accursed Black Pyramid. So essentially the way this works is it allows you in the tabletop to use to pull up miscast dice, or I'm sorry, dispel dice, and use them as power dice. So what that would mean in Total War Warhammer, the way I would kind of see it working is it would maybe activating it would give you a boost, like an arcane conduit, to your recovery of your winds of magic. But at the same time, it would add a miscast in the same way, like say like Destroyer or something like that, or like that Malekith uses, or something that would add a miscast to your enemy. So while you're shutting down their magic ability, you're boosting yours. I think that would be kind of a really interesting way to do things, and something very unique. We don't see very many dual purpose items like that. It's usually kind of serving one way or the other. We see like, oh, this super buffs you up, or this super debuffs your enemy. We don't see something where it's like gives you blank 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 and gives them negative negative negative. Not a lot of that, at least. So I'd like to see something like that, because the Tomb Kings are going to need a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Their army is not overly stalwart, you know, or you're not dealing with something like the vampire counts where you've got a really solid line of Graveguard. They don't have something like that. That is a very cheap kind of infantry line unit. I mean, they've got essentially the equivalent of that, but they're not heavily armored. They don't have the kind of killing blow special ability. They rely a lot on their lords and their constructs, and their constructs are pretty diverse and crazy and cool, and they're monstrous creatures like the Sphinx, the War Sphinx. So they've got a lot of cool things, but they need a lot of tricks, just like the Skaven. The Skaven have a lot of tricks up their sleeves, not to mention a bugged summoning of clan rats, but you know, that's neither here nor there. But they're going to need something like that to add flavor and not make it so you can just take 5 anti-infantry units and buzzsaw through their whole entire army. So I'm very excited to see what they do with that. So the last item for Arkhan the Black is the Liber Mortis. This accursed tomb is one of the fabled 9 books of Nagash, the most potent sources of necromantic magic in the world. So basically what this means is while he has the book, he becomes a level 5 wizard. Which again, as we've talked about, doesn't really hold any bearing in the Total War Warhammer world 1 and 2. You know, it doesn't really do much. So maybe what this does is it can be a one-time shot to just like a scroll of power, reduce all the recharge of all your items, or I'm sorry, of all your spells, or maybe it will supercharger spell for free. I'm not sure how they would really do something like this, but you know, they surprised me at the Liber Bubonicus for Skrulk. That had nothing to do with the way it was conferred in the actual tabletop game. So I'm sure they're going to do something like that with the Liber Mortis. Maybe it'll be the ability to summon up some skeletons, since Arkhan the Black is the Lich King. You know, he has such a commanding presence of the undead. You know, when you look at stuff like Lore of the Beast with the ability to summon up a Feral Manticore, it'd be really great to see the Liber Mortis have the ability to summon up a Necrosphinx or like a Necrolith Colossus. That'd be really cool to see something like that, because like I said, they need something, a trick up their sleeve to kind of stay competitive in a set of armies that is going to be pretty beastly by comparison. So I'm very excited to see how we see Arkhan the Black flesh out. But Settra, on the other hand, is going to be a bit different of a lord, especially compared to the rest of the Tomb King's lords, and I'll wait until we finish our lore blurb to go into that. So we'll actually just dive on into it with Settra the Imperishable, the great king of Nehekhara. This is actually an unfortunately small one. And we'll go into more of the greater lore here. That's why this is so small. It's just like the Malekith lore blurb for the Dark Elves. We've already talked so much about Malekith in the front end of the lore of the Dark Elves that you get a little tiny blurb with Settra here. So Settra the Imperishable is the king of all Tomb Kings. He is a ruthless leader whose thirst for conquest knows no bounds. Settra's power is far greater than any other Tomb King, and his unyielding will is such that he never needs to return to his sarcophagus to rest. Instead, he chooses to remain awake, the ruler of a devastated land. The immortality he lusted after in life is now his, and the civilizations that flourished in his absence feel his wrath. Settra rides to war upon his magical chariot, the crown of Nehekhara resting majestically upon his head as a symbol of his might. Settra is a bloodthirsty and skilled warrior, and he drives his enemies before him without pity, scything through the ranks of mortals with every sweep of his blessed blade. Settra alone among the Tomb Kings knows the secrets of the Lich Priests. He understands their language, but to his eternal frustration, Settra has never been able to fully master their magical arts. Though he has not forgiven the mortuary cult for their lies, Settra still has need of their abilities to summon forth his vassal kings and maintain his realm. However, it is a foolish Lich Priest who thinks he can wield the power over the King of Khemri. Any that invites Settra's wrath, Lich Priest or otherwise, are torn limb from limb. So, the rest of the Tomb King lords, the Tomb Kings, have pretty subpar what's called weapon skill. And we've already established that the weapon skill would probably be the most equivalent to melee attack in the Total War Warhammer world. The weapon skill in the tabletop is your ability to hit an opponent, just like melee attack is as well. Melee attack. Weapon strength being the amount of damage your weapon does. Hence, weapon strength. But Settra the Imperishable is a level 1 wizard, and he knows spells from the lore of Nehekhara. And we're going to go over the lore of Nehekhara here soon. But maybe he's going to be a bit of a hybrid lord, or maybe he'll have very limited use of the lore of Nehekhara, because he's kind of one of those lords where you're like, do his special rules end? Is he just kind of like you put him on the tabletop and then every other thing melts before him? Because he is a very pivotal part of the Tomb Kings, and taking him in your army is almost like okay, well, hey, anything around Settra, and Settra included, is just going to be a buzzsaw, and you have to get that thing, you have to get Settra down fast. So with that in mind, there are a lot of rules that make Settra, well, the Imperishable, you know, the name and everything, but he has this special rule called My Will Be Done, and the way that works in tabletop is it means that anything in the distance around him, anything in his unit takes his weapon skill to attack. So basically think of it this way. If Tyrion, with his high-ass weapons melee attack, were within a unit of High Elf Spearmen, they would all use his melee attack as their melee attack characteristic, to give you an idea of how gross that sounds in the tabletop world. So his weapon skill is 7, and if you were to put him with, let me go get the name of him exactly. I know they're just normal-ass skeleton spearmen, but for the sake of me being the lore master, I feel like I should know the actual name. Skeleton warriors, you know, there you go, whose weapon skill is 2. If you put them in a group, if you put him in a group of them, their weapon skills become 7. So that's to give you an idea of how strong that how strong he can buff up your army. And he's got this crown of Hekara. Let me read the implore here. Incorporating several crowns into one, his regal headdress allows Settra to instill his unyielding will into all those nearby. So rather than my will be done only affecting his unit, it affects 6 inches around him in the tabletop. To put that in the Total War terms, it'd be a very small radius around him. But that if that happens, if we get something like that where he buffs up substantially the melee attack of units around him, almost like we get for like the Toilet Lord himself of the dwarves, Thorgrim Grudgebearer, since he buffs up the actual warriors and everything around him, it'd be something like that, but to the umpteenth degree. Like, it would be just a much stronger version, because it turns your normal foot soldiers into these elite killing machines. So I'd love to see them do something like that, or at least incorporate some way of making Settra a very, very hard target to both kill and to kill with. I mean, like, he's going to be, as we progress through this, quite the beast. And he has this really cool Chariot of the Gods. This mighty chariot carries with it the blessings of all the gods and goddesses of Hekara, and its wheels blaze with mystical flame. And it's a bit more beefy of a normal chariot, but it has these 4 undead horses leading it, very kind of picturesque looking, and it makes it so that he actually does magical and flaming attacks. So there's that. And on top of it, it is a very hard to kill chariot, so it would infer a large melee defense and or armor bonus to Settra once he gets placed on top of it. And he's going to be one of the few, there's a couple, there's the Beastman and there's obviously Wulfric, who get access to a chariot, but his is going to be something that is a named chariot for him, right? Like, you've got the Dragon for Malekith, you've got Malhandir for Tyrion, you've got the Dark Pegasus for Marathi, you've got Flock for Mazdamundi, but now you're going to get Chariot of the Gods, rather than just a generic chariot for him to get on. So that's going to be a first for the Total War Warhammer world, and honestly, it's like the first for the game itself, too. I mean, I can't think of another big chariot lord in tabletop right now. Yeah, it's not coming to mind, but if any, I think there's one in Beastman. If any of you guys know, holla at me in the comments, shot caller in me in the comments. But again, just gives you an idea of what we're going to be up against here. He's going to be a little bit harder to kill than your normal lord. He's going to be kind of that hybrid lord in the same kind of vein as Manfred. Manfred's a pretty beastly hybrid lord, and even Malekith is a pretty strong one as well. But the Scarab of the Brooch of Usirian is another one of his, made in the image of the skull carapaced Kepra beetle. That's a mouthful. This talisman surrounds the wearer with the protective energies of Osirian, god of the underworld. So this, again, is going to give him both magic resistance and a ward save, and a pretty substantial one. So with 6+ being the worst save you could have in the tabletop, because it's 6 out of die, and 1+ being the best save you could have in tabletop, 1+ just means that if you get a negative modifier, it's always going to be a 2+ pretty much, unless you have a multiple negative modifier. But he has a 4+ ward save, which is a pretty significant ward save in tabletop. So the way I could see this translating to the actual Warhammer or Total War Warhammer 2 is something like a 20 or 30% ward save, something pretty substantial, with an accompanying smaller interval magic resistance as well, to make him a little bit harder of a target, again, to kill in both melee and from soul leech focusing or anything like that. And his last weapon here, or last item, is a weapon, the Blessed Blade of Petra. This revered weapon has been blessed by the sun god Petra. It's P-T-R-A, so Petra. The blade's white-hot edge, infused with the heat of the desert sun, sets the air itself ablaze and glows so brightly that it blinds Settra's foes. This would again give him flaming and magic attacks, and what it does actually is it makes it so that people can't take saves against it, so you can't really use your armor against it. We wouldn't see that here. I think we would just give them an AP characteristic, and on top of it, it makes it so that they have a -1 to hit. So what I would think of it as almost kind of like a Wulfric ability, where we get a -2 attack, maybe a -2 to armor. I think that might just be too much. I mean, we might be stacking too many abilities into Settra here. But it's worth noting, now that we've kind of had the lore of both Arkhan the Black and both Settra, it's worth noting their relationship. So Settra hates Arkhan, and Arkhan hates Settra. They're just an adorable couple. But on top of that, if they are the two legendary lords, and we see legendary lords like Tyrion and Teclis, they start far from each other but are clearly still allies in the grand scheme of things. Morathi and Malekith, on the other hand, aren't necessarily always going to be allies. And I see that same thing happening here with, as I slam my desk, Settra and Arkhan. Maybe they're not going to be allies. Maybe they're going to start off a little bit closer than is comfortable, and the whole point will be to subdue or completely ally with the other. That might be a cool objective for them, is either capture through confederation or through military might the opposite's land, like the Black Tower of the Black Tower of Arkhan. Kept wanting to think of a different word for it, but I think that'd be a really cool mechanic. But I think at the same time it'd be very throttling. The Tomb Kings, from a lore perspective, don't really like to leave Khemri, except for Arkhan the Black, who loves to leave Khemri. So if he is positioned, like we already know on the map, a little bit northern Khemri, which he is, it'd make more sense for his victory conditions to be more northern versus Settra's to be a little more western and southern, like a little more actually staying in the Southlands for the most part. But I'm really excited to see what we're going to get from the actual official announcement of Tomb Kings. What kind of list we're going to see, how we're going to see some of these units translate, and what kind of goodies we have in store. Because like I said, there's got to be some tricks up their sleeves. But that kind of concludes everything here for Settra and Arkhan the Black, guys. If you do have any questions about both, let me know. I'm going to be doing another video out real soon on what's the difference between vampire counts and Tomb Kings, because a lot of people have been asking me that, and there is a very distinct difference between the two. We'll also be doing some other videos here. Mortal Empire's just around the corner, so I can't wait to dive headfirst into that multiplayer. Get them dwarves going, high elf versus dwarves. Finally get it over with. But again, guys, thanks for watching here today. If you have any other questions, do let me know. Take care.